So this evening, our speaker is Roy Patience. He received his first camera, an Asahi Pentax, in 1963. That's the year I was born. And that began his journey into close-up photography. His first accessory was a set of spirotone extension tubes that allowed him to take all sorts of photos of tiny objects. After graduating from the University of Florida with a degree in physics, he spent 35 years in the defense industry working for General Dynamics and Hughes Aircraft on a variety of projects ranging from reconnaissance airplanes. Are you allowed to say this? No. To all sorts of space-based infrared sensors. After retiring, he renewed his interest in focus stacking of the natural world, ranging from wildflowers to insects to sand. That required numerous bits of new equipment like macro flashes, automated focusing rails, bellows, reversed and larger lenses, microscope objectives, and specialized focus stacking software. Now that newer cameras have incorporated focus bracketing into their firmware, he has more technology to master. And tonight he will introduce you to focus bracketing and focus stacking. Awesome. Okay, Roy, do you want to share your screen? And I'll make sure it's all looking great here, and then you can have at it.
And can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so
I'm afraid to go into presentation mode because I lost control earlier. So let's just stick with this.
okay.
And yes, I since I've been out of the industry for 25 years, when people ask me my occupation, I say rocket scientist, and then I tell them that I built spy satellites. So I have fun with it. Well, like Kathy said, I started this a long time ago, and my first fascination was with wildflowers in the Thousand Oaks area, and I was just obsessed with getting everything in perfect focus. So I learned about the limitations of depth of field, and let me run you through this. And Kathy, wave at me if anybody falls asleep, and I'll speed things up.
I'll let you know if someone has questions.
Okay, yeah, wave at me if there are questions, and I've added some padding at the end just in case. So why would you want to do focus bracketing, focus stacking? Well, the main thing is just to get more depth of field. The secondary benefit you have out of that is when you use larger apertures, you typically have higher resolution. You don't run into things like diffraction. Yes, you could get a big depth of field at f16 or f22 or something, but then you run into diffraction. So you can use nominal apertures and get higher resolution. And then the benefit of that is then you can have a better background blur. I don't know if anybody else has discovered that when you take pictures of tulips at Descanso Gardens at f16, you get all of that out of focus stuff in the background in better focus, and it kind of looks ugly. Okay, so some disadvantages. It works best with static subjects. I have actually taken a few focus stacks with flowers out in the wind, but it doesn't work very well. So that means a tripod. That means uh, getting something still or making it still, stopping the wind, and it does require non-trivial post-processing and retouching, and I'm hoping to have time to show you a little bit of that. Okay, where is it useful? Okay, this is not a focus stacking example. This is an example of where I should have focus stacked but didn't. In a deep landscape where you want to put a prominent object in the foreground, you might want to do something like take say 2 or 3 or 4 f11 shots. You take one of the foreground from near to wherever hyperfocal distance takes you. Then you focus in, part way out toward the middle of the field and maybe the middle of the exposure, then out to, the far distance so that you can get everything in focus. The judge's criticism of this photograph was, on the foreground isn't in focus. I'm sorry, I'm being whiny now. The foreground isn't in perfect focus, so I have to agree with that. So unfortunately, I can't go back anytime soon. So it's the best I could do. The sorts of things that I spend a whole lot of time or did in the past in my nature walks was uh, the fancy word photomacrography. Now this is a what is it? A wild cucumber spiral. I was fascinated with the shapes of the wild cucumber spirals and didn't realize I had captured a little baby tick while I was taking the picture. You'll also notice that the background is is quite blurry, although I must admit I did make use of generative AI to get rid of the chain link fence that was in the background. So where you'll wind up here in ultra close-ups like this is probably a depth of field of at least a half an inch. A typical, I'm going to give you a mind-boggling example in a minute of the depth of field at a typical single exposure. Here was a still life that I set up with a pair of ancient dividers and a piece of black plexiglass. And I didn't realize it until it was too late that even though I focus stacked it, I didn't quite get enough exposures to get the reflection in the foreground in perfect focus. But here's a place where I was able to get a depth of field of 3 or 4 inches without any trouble at all. So back to my passion of wildflowers. Here's a typical this is called a bush mallow. It's a flower that's about 3/4 of an inch across petal to petal. But single frame at f8. Yes, I got the innards in focus, but the foreground's out of focus. The background petal is out of focus. So I pulled out the stacking mechanism and shot a whole bunch of frames. This is in my stage when I was using a Sigma 180 lens and 24 frames. And we're in really good focus from near to far without getting the background in in much focus. So that was my primary passion was wildflowers. I have dozens and dozens and hundreds of wildflower pictures in my files. All right, so now let's do some dry stuff. Focus bracketing is actually the act of taking multiple images at different focus distances. Okay, everybody knows what depth of field is. We'll repeat it. The distance between the nearest and farthest planes that are acceptably sharp. Nothing is going to be perfectly sharp except in one point. And focus stacking is taking a group of these focus bracketed photographs and throwing away the out of focus stuff and keeping only the in focus stuff. And instead of getting into, computer magic, there might be somebody here who understands it. And then if there's someone else, it'll be someone other than me. I lived in the world of technical stuff for so many years that I threw all of that stuff away. And I purposely don't try to understand all of the technical jazz anymore. I just care about the output. I'm trying to turn off the technical side of my brain. Okay, so how can you, there's three methods that I can think of. And the one that actually works remarkably well is the first one. Um, you actually set yourself up in front of whatever your object is. You focus slightly in front of your your object, and you make sure you know which way to turn the focus ring on your camera, one little skosh at a time. I used to use the little ridges on the rubber uh, ring on the focus ring on my Nikon and Sigma lenses, and I would just simply twist the lens one increment, take a picture, twist and repeat until you get to beyond where you want to be in focus. It's a very simple method. It works remarkably well. And the focus stacking software takes care of any of the changes in magnification that you might run into while you're doing this. Next method might be something called a focus rail. A focus rail is simply just a long precision screw. You turn a crank and it moves the camera back and forth or the subject back and forth. Or if you want to get sophisticated, you can do like I did. And I bought something called a stack shot, which is a precision lead screw with a stepper motor and a computer controller that can move the camera tiny little increments, incredibly tiny little increments. And then all of that was, well, largely outmoded by in-camera focus bracketing that a fair number of modern cameras have. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, there are methods of stacking your photos, and I only use one out of these four. If somebody's really brilliant with Photoshop, they can manually blend pictures, say it's a landscape. I wouldn't attempt to manually blend an ultra close-up. Photoshop, I tried Photoshop about 3 times, and the results were so pathetic that I gave up on it instantly. A lot of people like Helicon Focus, which is a nice piece of software uh, written by a group in the Ukraine, as I recall. It has very good support, I am told. I haven't used their support. Uh, and the piece of software that I use is something called Zareen Stacker. I have no idea why the maker decided to call it Zareen, unless maybe that's Serene. But Zareen Stacker is extremely well supported by quite a large group of enthusiasts, as well as the man who wrote the software runs a forum that I think I talk about later that supports the software. He answers questions very rapidly, and he's a extremely well versed photographer as well as programmer. I think he must be a mathematician of some sort. Okay, suitable subjects. Okay, static subjects. This is an Indian pink in Wildwood Park in Thousand Oaks. One of my sought after rare wildflowers in that area. And in actuality, this flower actually did move just a little bit during exposures, but as you can see, we've got good focus from don't correct me, I'm not a biologist, from the anthers on the tip of the what's it's all the way down well into the stem. So there's probably a close to 3/4 of an inch to an inch of good depth of field. I can't remember the number. This was probably 18 or 20 shots with many of the flowers are shot with a 180 millimeter macro lens. Okay, you'll have to read this and then you'll get a laugh out of it, I hope. Gary Larson, my favorite cartoonist. This is the part of the presentation where people's eyes glaze over.
So we
Oh.
had to put a joke in.
So we have to joke about it a little bit. So there's a couple of methods of calculating depth of field. One works on a method called a circle of confusion. Circle of confusion is just how blurry is a point source going to be in a print, an 8 by 10 print viewed at some distance. I can't remember all the factors, but really what you get out of this is you see M is magnification, and you see the M squared term. So what happens is, to put it in layman's terms, magnification kills your depth of field. So I worked this example out, taking a one-to-one photograph at f16 on a crop sensor Nikon, you have 0.8 of a millimeter of depth of
The-
field. So it's, the depth, the thickness of a credit card is all the depth of field you have at 1:1. If you want to go to 2:1, you now have 1/4 the depth of field. So it's teeny tiny. Okay, and another similar calculation, the maker of Zurine Stacker came up with this one using wave optics, and I haven't had time to even think about his methodology. But once again, you see the magnification squared term in the denominator is what kills you. So he says, like for this similar example, roughly a 0.5 millimeter. What he's telling us here, rather than actually depth of field, is step size. So if you were trying to shoot something at 1:1, you need to be moving roughly a 0.5 millimeter per step to get everything in focus. So that's why I do focus stacking, is because for some reason I'm obsessed with getting everything in focus. So why did I buy a lens baby camera? Okay, so here's another, which is a Phacelia. Phacelias are, once again, this is kind of postage stamp size flower. And well, that's not a very good term. Postage stamps come in different flavors. This is about the size of a quart, very, very tiny. And one of the things I noticed when I was working on these images is that a single exposure didn't give me the detail that I get in this photograph. The subtle texture, you can see the purple veins in the petals of the flower. You can almost see the pollen on the tips of the anthers. And the the background is truly out of focus, even though I shot these at f11. All right, single frame. This is a little bit on the dim side. I'm not, I mean, you can at least divine out of this that the tips of the anthers are well out of focus and the flower is in pretty good focus. So, all right. All right. All right. We talked about stationary camera. We talked about moving rail. So that's a duplicate slide. Okay. The focus ring method. I gave you that example a little bit earlier. It's just once again, it's a step and repeat. It's extremely important in this method to understand which way to turn your focus ring to get closer or farther away. It took me a long time to learn that, and I'm still not sure I still remember it. But this is an excellent method for, say, landscapes, close-ups, your typical macro shot, up to even 1:1. It's not terribly good for really extreme macro, which in extreme macro here I mean smaller than more magnification than 1:1. Looking at something the size of a dime, or maybe half that size.
Can I, can I ask a question?
Please.
Um, so you're, you were doing it in like millimeter, like 0.5 millimeter increments with a macro. What sort of increments are you doing it with landscapes?
With a landscape, I think I would typically, what I would do there, instead of using the focus ring, I think focus ring probably is really not suitable for landscape, now that I think about it. What I would do with a landscape is I would either use live view and touch screen, touch on an area very near the foreground, an area maybe halfway to midground, from halfway from midground to um, infinity, and then in a point at the far distance. I think my focus ring method probably would not work on landscape. Or alternately, if you don't have a touch screen, you look through the viewfinder, you set your close focus point with your jog ring or whatever to be those 4 or 5 points. That would be does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you could do it on manual and just kind of move it to where the next big important thing is in focus, and then mid-range and like that.
Right. Typically with landscapes, you can get by with probably a half a dozen images without much trouble. The main thing is getting that bit in the foreground, if indeed you want that in focus. I think for a deep landscape to look good, you want to have that foreground in really sharp focus as opposed to being blurry.
Right, and it's not such a big issue because you're not doing 180 macro. You're doing like
Right. You're probably
24
right.
or,
Yeah, you're doing a 14, 24,
right,
35 millimeter shot. So your depth of field with lenses like that is still fairly big, feet
right.
rather than millimeters.
Okay,
Okay. All right. So here's, I have to throw in examples just to so you don't have to listen to me drone on. You know, a flower from an apple tree in the backyard. Okay, here's one was shot at f6.3 instead of something deeper. Okay, the moving camera method, this is what a focus rail looks like. If you look at the photograph, you'll see going from lower right to upper left of the photograph, you see one rail, and that would be like left to right, and then the other rail going from lower left to upper right would move the camera in and out of focus. And it's simply just a precision screw with a knob on it. You turn it, one fraction of a turn. What I used to do is make little protractors that I'd stick on the end of the knob so I could turn it so many degrees at a time, and that corresponded to a certain distance. I haven't used one of these things in quite a while. I found that I think perhaps the in-camera focus bracketing is probably going to make these things a little bit obsolete. And then, oop, wrong way. Then for those who love gadgets, this is something called a stack shot. The little gizmo over on the left is a small microcomputer that controls a stepper motor that the stepper motor has steps of something like one 400th of a turn, so like less than a degree per turn, and a very precision screw. So this device can move in steps of approximately 2 microns, that is 2 millionths of a meter. So very, very small. I've been able to, I have an example later where I show you where I took a picture of something with to get extreme depth of field. Haven't pulled out my stack shot in a couple of years. I have to do that, but it's a handy tool once you get used to operating it. Oh yeah, here's my example. I don't know the name of these flowers, but for some reason I'm fascinated with these flowers. I had one of these in my backyard in Thousand Oaks, and the individual blossoms, blooms, flowers are maybe 3 millimeters wide, maybe 4 or 5. So that entire frame is a is maybe 25 millimeters wide, maybe an inch wide. And this is so I took photographs a tenth of a millimeter apart, 164 of them. So I wound up with 16 millimeters of depth of field. And it's still not that good a shot. Yes, technically it's a great shot, but I'm not sure that artistically it's very much. So I have to work on my artistry more than my technical ability. But I still like it. Okay.
nice.
Software. Um, we talked about the three. My favorite Zareen Stacker is a one-time purchase for those who don't like to pay licensing fee. The very least expensive version, which I think is what I have, is $89. Uh, I bought this software it probably 20 years ago, so it has not cost me much per year. Uh, one downfall is it does not support RAW files. So you have to take RAW files and convert them to either JPEGs or TIFFs, depending on how much detail you really want. Helicon Focus, the least expensive version is about $30 per year. So it's really not a terribly big investment. It does support RAW files and it returns a DNG file, which is probably a little bit better. Um, it's nice to be able to uh, have a DNG that you could perhaps manipulate a little bit more after the fact. And I was at West Coast School with Michael Gordon, who's quite an accomplished landscape photographer, and he uses Helicon frequently, and he thought it was really good. And the few times he's had problems, he's gotten things solved in a big hurry. And you've already heard my opinion about Photoshop. Photoshop, the few times I've tried it, did a really bad job, and it winds up sending you back a whole bunch of layers and a whole bunch of masks. The way Photoshop works is it creates a mask to mask out the out of focus portions. So if you want to retouch it, you have to work on individual masks, which for you Photoshop experts might not be a big deal, but for me it's a big deal. So that's my opinion and I'm sticking to it. Okay. All right. Then only very, very recently, I have begun to try to figure out in-camera focus bracketing. So I think Canon calls it focus bracketing, Nikon calls it focus shift shooting, Sony calls it focus bracketing, and Olympus actually does a better job than all the rest of them. They actually do the bracketing and the stacking in the camera, although I don't have any direct experience with the output. So the nice thing about Olympus is you can create a stack of pictures and it will also save the raw files and it will create a JPEG in camera to give you an idea of how good a job you've done, which sounds like a good idea. The Olympus guys are really smart. Olympus has a background in doing macro photography that in the far distant past there were extremely good lenses and cameras. Okay. All right. Okay. How do you do focus bracketing? I'm a little repetitive here. So landscapes, you take a few images with wide spacing. Macros, you take a whole bunch of images with very narrow spacing. That is probably intuitively obvious. All right. So here's the problem you have with in-camera focus bracketing with my limited experience on one Nikon camera. And Nikon says, oh, well, you have a step size of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. You have absolutely no idea what that size is. None whatsoever. So you have to experiment. I went up to the Santa Barbara Butterfly Pavilion a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really nice morning. The butterflies were being very, very still, and I was able to experiment with live specimens. So I set the camera up to, probably a butterfly's width, and took 99 pictures because that seemed like a number, and I used increment number one. Well, that worked, but I could only tell more or less after the fact. I guess I could have looked at the images on the back of the camera, and it took roughly 25 or 30 pictures to get everything focused through the width of a butterfly with its wings closed. So call it half an inch. So the way I look at it, we've already all paid for the images we're going to take with the camera, so take more than you think you'll need. It's not like film. So the only way I can say here is it's something that you're going to have to um, experiment with on your own with objects of some known size, like if you happen to have some dice laying about, create a scene with something small. Stick a ruler down on the table and take pictures of a ruler, and you're going to have to intuitively come up with what's the right spacing. What works at f4 might not work at uh, f8, or conversely, what works at f16, a step size that might work at f16 might not work if you have a step size at f4. So once again, it's something you have to experiment with. And to the best of my knowledge, there's nobody who can tell you what the step size is. I wonder if the step size may even be controlled by your aperture or your magnification. Who knows? I haven't had time and probably not the inclination to do the experiments. Okay. All right. Let's see if this works. Okay. Back to the butterfly experiment. It was a pair of butterflies in romantic embrace, and I would say the depth of field was that I needed was about 3/4 of an inch, maybe it was a half an inch, maybe it was more. Using the Nikon Z8 and the 105 macro at, who knows why I picked f6 7.1. It was more than 5.6 and less than 8. But it wound up taking 45 slices at increment number 1, whatever that means. Now let's see. Okay, now let's see if I can show you an example without making a giant mess. So I'm going to stop sharing momentarily and switch over to Photoshop. Let's see if this works. Okay, I stopped sharing. I'm going to share again. And, and, and took off my glasses so I can't see the screen now.
I hate it when that happens.
Here we go. Okay, so now let's see if we can do a twofer here. Here's, okay, here's the side. Can you see the side-by-side image there?
Yes.
Okay, on the left side of the screen is the input image. And on the right side of the screen is the final result. Now, what I will do is I'll go up here to, isn't that interesting how it just happened to start at image number 8,000? Now,
Ooh, yeah.
can you see how out of focus the image is? Is
Yes.
that better? All right, so we're pretty well out of focus there. And then as we step down, I'll step down like 5 at a time. All right, step. All right, we'll have a small intermission while I get my glasses on. Okay. Can't tell whether the screen's out of focus or whether I'm out of focus. Aha! All right, so I moved my way down to image number 21, and that's in pretty good focus. All right, so you can see a lot of detail here. In fact, if we go up to 100%, you can see quite a bit of detail there. But you notice the antennae have gone out of focus, but there's incredible detail in I looked at this the other day and was just fascinated with the detail. You can, on my screen anyway, you can see individual scales on the butterfly's wing. However, if you move over to the other butterfly,
Yeah.
the one in the background is still out of focus. So we had to go down to, all right, so
Oh,
30 steps in, we can start to see detail in the butterfly in the background. So that's why I had to go 40 some steps deep. And now I've gone beyond the point where the focus point is behind the backmost butterfly. So what I have here on the other side of the screen, go back. If we go to the other side of the screen and go up, we'll go back up to 100% again. And you can see in the output that everything in the backmost butterfly is in pretty doggone good focus. And everything in the frontmost is in good focus. The antennae are in good focus. The eyes are well focused. Lots of interesting detail.
Ooh, that's cool.
I still don't know whether, if there's an entomologist out there, I don't know whether butterfly and insect eyes have this pattern or whether that's some kind of moire effect. Somebody has to tell me that. But but see, that's in remarkable, in my opinion anyway, that's in remarkably good focus. The branch that it was resting on, the branch that it was resting on is not perfect. I didn't get that quite right. You can even see a little bit of a spider web there. So this is now the retouched output. Now, how are we doing for time?
Great. We
Okay,
have until like 7:45.
okay, let's do a live demonstration. All right, so the way Zerene Stacker works is you load up all of your images, so I'll leave them loaded up, and then you do something here called stack, and it goes in and aligns the images, just like those of you who are Photoshop users know that Photoshop can align images rotationally and also change the magnification so that everything is at the same scale. So, like for example, if you do the focus ring method I was telling you about earlier, uh, the magnification is going to change, so the size of your objects is going to change. So you have to get everything to be the same size and aligned before you can stack it. So let's do there are two, it uses two methods. One is called P max and the other one is called D max. And the two methods give you slightly different.
What does it say?
I was gonna ask him about if the wind blows the subject, if the software compensates, I was gonna wait till later, but I think that's exactly what he's talking about right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. If something moves, the align function will move things back into alignment so it can stack it. Although sometimes if it moves too far, it doesn't work. All right, so here's method number one. And I have a very fast M4 MacBook Pro. And it still takes a while to do this. And about this time I get the processor has been over X hundred degrees for 30 seconds. And you can see on the left, on the right-hand screen, this is called current output. So as it works its way through creating the stacked image, it updates the right-hand side so you can watch it
Cool.
get in better focus. And something interesting that I can show you, interesting to me anyway, is that I shot these at ISO 800 and did not do any noise reduction before I created the files. This was really just intended to be a quick and dirty example. And I noticed the two different methods of photo stacking created different looking out of focus backgrounds. Okay, this, I won't go into this one part yet. This is something called a depth map. For those of you who play with Camera Raw and Lightroom, there's a masking process that creates a depth map. And so it somehow looks for you can see it building the image up on the right. And these are the different planes of focus. And okay, that's one of the antennae coming into focus.
So interesting.
And then the far distance coming into focus. So recently what I've discovered is this depth map focus tack tends to give you the best looking result. And I wasn't as astute earlier in some of my work. So we'll have the depth map. Yeah, here's the depth map. And no, that's too much. For 50%. Somebody give me a hint if I'm boring you to death. So,
You're doing good.
okay, I'm fascinated with this sort of stuff, so I don't get bored easily. Okay, so here's what I discovered. In the depth map, you see where I'm playing with the cursor. We have some kind of unusual lines. Can you see those?
Yeah.
Dark and light spots. So that's
Yeah.
an artifact of the software processing. So I flip over to the PMax, which is, I think is looking at a different method of stacking. If I flip over to PMax, make sure, yeah, there's PMax. Notice that it doesn't look as bad there, but it looks slightly different. So then the next good thing we can do, next fun part that I like about this program is we can now go into something called retouching. All right, so in the retouch mode, let's see, on the right side, we have the retouched image, and on the left side, we can pick one or the other. Except, wait a minute, let me go back here and make sure I started. Now, I have to start. Yes, I really want to discard it. I want to start with the depth map. So I'm going to start with the depth map on the right, and then I'm going to say edit, start retouching. I won't retouch the entire image, but what you can do here is you can either, on the left-hand side, I picked the other method of stacking, which for some reason the background is grainier, but we'll just zero in on something interesting like the antennae. And what I can do with the retouching system is this is almost identical to the clone tool in Photoshop. If say, let's not strive for perfection here. Can you see the discontinuity in the darkness and lightness here on the right-hand image? If I edit, I'm picking the less ugly part out of the image on the left and cloning it into the image on the right.
Huh.
So that's how the retouching works in a very simplified fashion. And I think I should stop now before I bore you all to death. I spent probably 20 or 30 minutes retouching the example I showed you, but keeps me off the street. What I found was the primary thing that I found unusual was that the the antennae looked a little bit funny. And if I were going to go back and make a really um, presentation quality image out of this, I would go back to my originals, and I think I would run them through Lightroom noise reduction, even though it's ISO 800. And I use JPEGs here. I would use TIFF files for a final result, because when I look at the image on the left, let me go up to see if I can show it. The there's a there's an awful lot of grain in the image over here on the left compared to the one on the right. And I don't quite understand that. So what I would do is go back and do what I said. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this, blink, and attempt to go back to my presentation. Now, Kathy, is anyone still awake?
Yes, people are actually awake.
Oh, good, good. Okay, all
Let's
right.
see anybody's eyes closed.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I've got some. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. All right. So here's my attempt at making a flow chart with words. How do you think about a scene when you're photographing? You know, do you either use common sense that says, oh, I can't get everything from 6 inches to infinity in focus, even at f16. Well, let's try focus stacking. Or you use a depth of field calculator like photopills. And you say, okay, well, what kind of step size? If you're doing a macro, you might want something that's half the depth of field. But you could pull out photopills and find out that at f16 with a 14 millimeter lens, you have to be focused at 5 feet to get hyperfocal focusing. And the white bucket example I showed you earlier, I clearly wasn't focused at the right point. And so we've talked about shoot, step, repeat, shoot, step, repeat, and then stop when you hit the, the far point. Okay, processing. You know, you gather all the images together in a folder. You go through them and you say, okay, here's the first image I took. Is there anything here in focus? If there's nothing in focus, you can throw it away. You keep stepping through your pictures until you've hit the last place where you find something you want in focus. And another thing that I have done in the past is I will take an out of focus picture that is quite a ways out of focus, maybe an inch or two or three behind my intended end of focus, and use that as a using the retouching method I sort of showed you a minute ago. Use a lot of that out of focus background in the final putting the image together, so you can get much smoother bokeh. All right, you convert it to TIFF or JPEG, and believe it or not, this program will handle 100 megabyte, 150 megabyte TIFF files and stack them pretty efficiently. I used JPEGs in this example to make sure it went a little faster. And use the two or more methods. I think Helicon Focus may actually have three different methods, but I don't understand what the third method is. But one has to be a depth map, and one is a look at the individual focus analytically method, the PMAX. And so you'll have two or possibly three output images, and then you're going to go into the retouching that I showed you a little bit earlier. Okay. All right. So we review the outputs. Um, what you do is you just move at high magnification from just like you search for dust spots. You search for things in focus, look for defects, and then in the retouching method, you clone from one slice into the output processed, edited, retouched image. Now, speaking of dust spots, something I discovered early on uh, in focus stacking is that often if you have a dust spot, it will be at different magnifications in different images. So instead of a dust spot, you'll wind up with a whole line of dust spots. So it's it's smart to get the dust spots taken care of before you stack. All right. Okay. So now we're getting to the more interesting part, um, the pretty picture part. Now here's one that was in my backyard. This was just a nursery store cactus. I'm fascinated with cactus flowers. So this is a tiny little thing. It's probably less than half an inch from side to side. Uh, Again, stacked with this was the old lot of these things are with my old crop frame camera from 10 years ago. It was out in the backyard trying to do abstract photographs of a dahlia, one frame, and I said, "Oh, what the heck? Let's try and stack that." So you can see the difference. You know, you'll have to use your own artistic sense to tell you whether that picture is better than that picture. I don't know. Depends on what you're going after. You know, is it nice to have it sharp? I don't know. It may not necessarily be so good to have everything in focus, but that's your you have your own artistry. While I was shooting
Oh,
the dahlia, an inchworm crawled by. I don't know if anybody has ever watched an inchworm in action, but they are fascinating. You can see it has three sets of grippers, claws, whatever on the back end, and looks like one set on the front end. And it would extend its body out straight, grab hold with the front, let go with the back, and lift up, like in the position it's in now, and move along. And this was one of its most artistic points. Again, this is a very small fraction of everybody knows how small a dahlia leaf is. Maybe one day I can go back and reprocess this with topaz and sharpen it up. It's not in perfect focus. That's the same inchworm with a hunk of dahlia in its mouth. So there was a very fruitful day that day. All right, for those of you who are frightened of bugs, there are going to be some bugs coming up here. You know, you all know Chris Broughton rather well. Chris, and I think Andrew to a certain extent is caught. Chris accuses me of carrying bugs around with me to put on the flowers, but I promise I don't do that. One day I was out in the field uh, looking at something that I think are called funnel spiders. These guys build a funnel-shaped web and then hide down in the neck of the funnel. So this is, a whole bunch of frames shot from, looking down straight down at it and then focus stacked. And I was staring into the camera viewfinder and the spider decided to lunge forward and I almost fell on my, what from fear. But this isn't actually a perfect image because I'll throw out some terms here. There's something called, oh, you see the red circle over there. That's something called mush. This often happens when you have an object, you have like this was a hair on the spider. Think of a stem of a flower. As it goes out of focus, it gets larger. Well, it's very difficult to get rid of that out of focus mush, as it's called. So you have to do a lot of retouching. And then on the right hand side, I didn't get enough frame. So that part in the yellow circle is actually, I can't recover that information because it's not there. There wasn't anything in focus because my step size was too big and I didn't know that at the time. Again, my fascination with wildflowers. That's a red-skinned onion, some relative of flowering onions. But you see, I didn't get enough frames because the anthers in the background are just slightly out of focus. But the background is creamy, delicious bokeh. And this probably doesn't belong in here. That flower's not worth looking at. My God, I actually got to the end. Um, the my favorite resource for deep technical photomicrography is the top site called photomicrography.net. They have it's well worth looking. For those of you who like technical stuff, there's two forums devoted to nothing but technical stuff, like how to put together a focus rail that can take images that are mind-boggling. The Fred Miranda website has a pretty good macro forum. I don't have a terribly good, I had a much bigger list and I went back and looked at them, and most of them are quite old. Being Mark is I think is a photographer in Australia who does some really interesting work. And I would be happy to answer anybody's questions. If you want to send me an email, or Andrew can give you my phone number, I'd be happy to tell you everything I know about photomicrography and or focus stacking and or fill in the blank. I don't mind sharing what little I know about the world. And I think that's the end.
Awesome.
Any questions?
Are there questions? Anyone? I have a situational question. With the spider, were you hand holding the camera? Or did
No,
you
it was
set up
on
your
tripod.
tripod? And
On
it's
tripod.
that you set up the tripod and everything, huh?
Yeah,
That's
it's a
impressive.
tripod hanging over the spider and waiting for everything to get still. Now, when I was at the butterfly pavilion recently, I did some experiments that I haven't finished uh, stacking yet, where I set myself up at like f8 or thereabouts, and with the Z8 I can shoot 5 frames a second, and I don't know whether you can, you'll have to imagine here. Have the camera in front of my face. I am in manual focus, so turn off autofocus, and I position myself ahead of the frontmost part of the object, mash the shutter button, and quickly move my head in slightly. So you move forward a half an inch or an inch with the shutter going full tilt boogie. And I've had remarkably good success doing that.
Hmm.
A friend and I were out in the park some years ago, and there was a cold front coming through or something, and the wind was blowing pretty hard, and I was actually able to get a half decent focus stack of a shooting star flower, handheld with this thing waving in the breeze. So it's a technique that can be used.
You just leave plenty of room around
Yeah,
the
yeah,
thing in case
yeah,
of
yeah,
movement.
yeah, yeah. You leave room around, and you do it a whole bunch of times. I stick my hand in front of the camera, take a picture of my fingers, and then I'll do a focus stack and then stick my hand in, so that I can differentiate one focus stack from another.
Right. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm such a novice, but I love taking pictures, but when I saw or heard photo stacking, I didn't really know what it is, but the photo stacking is actually macro focusing.
Yeah. It's a way to get your entire macro image in focus
That's,
instead of just one little slice of it. Yeah. Or if you're doing a landscape, you can have some flowers or a bush in the front in focus, as well as trees in the middle and mountains at the back. Have everything in focus, which is, you can't really do, even at f/22. So it's a way of doing it in landscapes too. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I came in late, so I didn't think we needed to launch the whole video. Thank you for putting this together. Let me look at the chat. Great presentation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel like I'm part of the family anyway, since I know Kathy,
Yeah.
and Andrew and Nan and all of the other people from S4C or from going to the volleyball competition with everybody or seeing you at an air show. I really wanted to be here, but I had some surgery last Thursday and decided I would love to drive out there, but I probably shouldn't have, so I stayed home.
That's smart.
I told him he's welcome anytime.
Yeah, oh, for sure, definitely. Welcome anytime. Okay, well, I think that we can call it a night. Thank you so much, Roy, for being here.